Why would someone risk everything over a cheeseburger? That's the question Special Agent Marcus Chen found himself asking as he sat in his unmarked sedan, third in line at a Burger Haven drive-thru on a Tuesday night that would change his understanding of human desperation forever. The neon sign above flickered against the darkening sky, casting shadows that danced across his dashboard like warnings he should have heeded. He was supposed to be tracking a money laundering operation through this franchise, nothing more. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The air was thick with the smell of grease and exhaust fumes, a symphony of idling engines creating a low hum that vibrated through the chassis of every vehicle in line. Marcus adjusted his rearview mirror, watching the silver Honda 2 cars ahead, with the casual vigilance that had become second nature after 12 years in federal service. The driver was a woman in her mid-30s, her silhouette sharp against the fluorescent lights of the order speaker. She was gesturing wildly, her hand movements cutting through the air with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't just about getting her order right. He couldn't hear the conversation, not yet, but he could see the tension building in the set of her shoulders, the way her head tilted forward aggressively toward the speaker box. The car between them, a battered pickup truck with a loose muffler, inched forward. Marcus rolled down his window slightly, letting the cool evening air mix with his vehicle's recycled atmosphere. That's when he heard her voice, sharp and cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. "I said no pickles. How hard is that to understand?" The response from the speaker was muffled, apologetic. Standard customer service protocol. But something in the woman's posture told Marcus this wasn't standard at all. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel now, white-knuckled, and even from this distance, he could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. This was personal. This was rage that had been simmering long before she pulled into this parking lot. The pickup truck moved forward to the window, and the Honda crept closer. Marcus found himself leaning forward, his training kicking in, despite this being completely outside his jurisdiction, outside his mission. But 15 years of reading human behavior had taught him to recognize the signs of someone on the edge, and every instinct he possessed was suddenly screaming that he was watching someone cross a line from which there was no return. She was talking to herself now. He could see her lips moving, her head shaking in small, tight movements. The glow from her phone screen illuminated her face for a moment, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her expression. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, something calculated. She was scrolling through something, her thumb moving with purpose, and then she made a call. Quick, 30 seconds, maybe less. When she hung up, she smiled, and that smile made Marcus's blood run cold. The pickup truck pulled away with its bag of food, and the Honda rolled up to the window. Marcus watched as the teenage employee, couldn't have been more than 17, leaned out with the apologetic expression and a fresh bag. The woman didn't take it. Instead, she said something, gestured to the parking lot, and then pointed back at the building. The employee's face went from apologetic to confused, then to something that looked like fear. He nodded, said something into his headset, and handed her the bag, but she didn't leave. The Honda pulled forward just enough to clear the window, then stopped, blocking the drive-through lane completely. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Behind him, a minivan had joined the line, and behind that, a motorcycle. They were all trapped now, locked in a concrete corridor with a curb on one side and a building on the other. The woman got out of her car. That's when Marcus knew this wasn't about a burger anymore. Maybe it never had been. She moved with purpose, walking not toward the building's entrance but toward the side door marked "Employees Only." She pulled something from her jacket pocket. For one heart-stopping moment, Marcus thought it was a weapon, his hand instinctively moving toward his service piece. But it was just a phone. She was recording. The side door opened, and a manager emerged, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a name tag that read, Dale. He had his hands up in a placating gesture, already apologizing before he'd fully stepped outside. The woman started yelling, her voice carrying across the parking lot, but it was the words that made Marcus's stomach drop. "You think you can disrespect me? You think you can poison my daughter's food and get away with it?" Poison. The word hung in the air like smoke. Marcus was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his cover be damned. Dale was shaking his head, confusion and fear mixing on his face. He was trying to explain something, but the woman wasn't listening. She was playing to the camera now, to her phone, to whatever audience she'd summoned with that earlier call. Then, Marcus saw them. 3 cars pulling into the parking lot from the street entrance, moving fast. They parked in formation, blocking the exit, and people got out. 6 of them, maybe 7. They had phones too, all recording, all moving toward Dale with the coordinated precision of a practiced group. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. "You're going to pay for what you did," the woman was screaming now. "You're all going to pay." Dale backed toward the door, but one of the newcomers, a young man with tattoos snaking up his neck, grabbed his arm. Not violently, not yet, but enough to stop him. Another one was filming his face, inches away, shouting about accountability and justice and lawsuits. The words overlapped, creating a cacophony of accusations that Marcus couldn't fully parse, but the intent was clear. This was a coordinated attack, digital age vigilantism playing out in real time over an alleged wrong that may or may not have actually occurred. Marcus's hand hovered over his door handle. He could see other employees gathering at the windows inside, their faces pressed against the glass, phones out, also recording. The people in the cars around him were doing the same. Everyone was documenting, but nobody was intervening. The minivan behind him honked, then stopped abruptly when the driver realized what was happening. The woman pulled something else from her jacket. Not a weapon, a piece of paper. She shoved it at Dale's face, screaming about hospital bills, about her daughter being sick, about allergies and negligence and criminal liability. Dale was trying to read it, his hands shaking as he held the paper. And that's when Marcus saw the young man's hand move to his waistband. Time seemed to slow. Marcus's training took over, his mind racing through protocols, jurisdictions, the complications of being undercover versus the immediate threat unfolding before him. The young man pulled out what looked like a can of spray paint, and in one fluid motion, he sprayed Dale's shirt, marking him with bright red paint that looked disturbingly like blood in the parking lot lights. "Tagged!" someone shouted, and the group erupted in chaotic celebration, their phones still recording, capturing Dale's humiliation, his confusion, the red stain spreading across his uniform like a wound. But something had shifted. Marcus could see it in Dale's face. The fear was giving way to something else. Anger. Desperation. His hand moved to his pocket and Marcus's entire body tensed, his years of experience recognizing the precursor to violence before it manifested. Marcus was already moving, his door swinging open with a force that made it bounce on its hinges, his voice cutting through the chaos with the kind of authority that comes from a decade of commanding respect in impossible situations. "Federal agent, everyone step back now." The words left his mouth before he'd fully processed the decision to blow his cover, before he'd calculated the cost of abandoning 6 months of careful infiltration work. But Dale's hand was still moving toward his pocket, and the crowd was pressing closer, their phones creating a wall of glowing screens that turned the parking lot into a stage, an arena where something terrible was about to happen unless someone changed the script. The effect was immediate and disorienting. Heads snapped toward Marcus, the coordinated aggression of the group fracturing into individual confusion. The woman with the paper froze mid-sentence, her mouth still open around an accusation that would never be completed. The young man with the spray paint took a step back, his free hand rising instinctively in surrender, even as his other hand still gripped the can. Dale's hand stopped, hovering at his pocket, his eyes finding Marcus with the desperate hope of a drowning man spotting a lifeline. Marcus advanced slowly, his badge held high in his left hand, his right hand resting on his hip near his weapon, in a posture that was both casual and unmistakably ready. The badge caught the neon light from the Burger Haven sign, reflecting red and yellow flashes that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. I said, "Step back. This situation is over." His voice was calm now, conversational almost, but carrying an edge that made it clear this wasn't a request. The young man with the tattoos was the first to find his voice. "We're not doing anything illegal. This is a peaceful protest. We have a right to film in public." His words came out rehearsed, like he'd prepared for this exact confrontation, and Marcus recognized the language of someone who'd watched too many sovereign citizen videos, who believed that knowing a few legal phrases was the same as understanding the law. Blocking a business's entrance, preventing employees from working, harassment, intimidation, and assault with paint constitute several violations, Marcus replied, moving closer, positioning himself between Dale and the group. "But right now, I don't care about any of that. I care about everyone leaving here safely tonight." He let his eyes sweep across each face, making contact, making it personal. "So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to return to your vehicles, and you're going to leave. If there's a legitimate complaint here, there are proper channels. This isn't one of them." The woman stepped forward, her phone still recording, now pointed at Marcus. "You don't understand. They poisoned my daughter. She's been sick for 3 days because they put pickles on her burger despite her allergy. Look at this." She thrust the paper toward him, and Marcus could see it was a hospital admission form, or at least something that looked like one in the dim light. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. If this was legitimate, if there really had been negligence, then these people weren't just vigilantes seeking internet fame. They were parents driven by fear and anger into making catastrophic choices. But if it wasn't, if this was manufactured outrage for clicks and views, then he was watching something even more disturbing. The weaponization of social media mob justice against minimum wage workers who had no power to defend themselves. "Ma'am, if your daughter was harmed due to negligence, that's serious. But this," he gestured at the crowd, the blocked drive-thru, Dale's paint-stained shirt, "this doesn't help her. This doesn't get you justice. This gets you arrested and destroys any legitimate case you might have." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "Give me the hospital paperwork. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. But you need to leave now." For a moment, he thought she might comply. Her hand wavered, the paper trembling slightly. But then someone from the group shouted, "Don't trust him. He's protecting corporate interests. This is why nothing ever changes." The voice came from a woman Marcus couldn't quite see, somewhere in the back of the crowd, and the effect was like gasoline on embers. The mother's face hardened, her moment of doubt evaporating. "No," she said, pulling the paper back. "No, we're not leaving until he apologizes, until they all apologize, until they admit what they did." Her voice was rising again, the phone in her other hand steady now, capturing every word for an audience that was probably growing by the second as this went live somewhere on the internet. Behind Marcus, Dale spoke for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even work the kitchen. I'm just the night manager. I've been here 3 months. I don't know anything about your daughter, and I'm sorry she's sick, I really am. But I didn't do anything to her." The paint was still wet on his shirt, and Marcus could see him trying not to touch it, standing with his arms slightly away from his body like the stain was contagious. The admission seemed to enrage the mother further. "You're the manager. You're responsible. You all are." She turned to her phone, addressing the camera directly now, and Marcus realized she was had been performing this entire time. This is what they do. They hurt our children and then hide behind, "I don't know anything and it's not my fault." Well, tonight, we're making them see us. We're making them hear us. The crowd pressed forward again, emboldened by her speech, and Marcus had to make a choice. He could arrest her, escalate this into a physical confrontation that would definitely end with someone getting hurt, and the entire incident becoming a national news story about police brutality or federal overreach. Or he could try something else, something that went against every protocol he'd been taught, but that his gut was telling him might be the only way to defuse this powder keg. He lowered his badge and raised both hands, palms out, a gesture of vulnerability that made Dale gasp behind him. "Okay," Marcus said. "Okay, I hear you. Your daughter is sick and you're scared and angry and you want someone to acknowledge that. I get it." He took a breath, letting the moment settle. "But I need you to hear me too. That man behind me, Dale, he's got 2 kids of his own. Works 2 jobs to support them. He's not your enemy. The kid at the window who made your burger, he's probably in high school saving for college. They're not corporate executives making millions. They're people just trying to get through the day, just like you." The mother's expression flickered, uncertainty creasing her forehead. Marcus pressed forward, his voice softer now, more personal. "If there was negligence, if someone really did ignore an allergy warning and hurt your daughter, then they should be held accountable. But through lawyers, through health inspectors, through the systems we have precisely for this reason. Not like this. Because right now, even if you're completely right about everything, even if every accusation is true, all anyone watching that video will see is a group of people terrorizing a scared man in a parking lot. And your daughter's justice gets lost in that narrative." The parking lot had gone quiet. Even the idling engines seemed to have lowered their volume, as if the machines themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. The mother's phone was still recording, but her arm had lowered slightly, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes, the rage giving way to the fear and exhaustion underneath. Then the young man with the tattoos spoke again, and Marcus knew he'd lost her. "He's manipulating you. Can't you see? This is textbook gaslighting. Making you doubt yourself, making you the bad guy when they're the ones who hurt your child." He turned to the crowd, playing to the cameras, his voice rising to a shout. "We came here for justice, and we're not leaving until we get it." The crowd erupted in agreement, phones thrust higher, voices overlapping in a cacophony of demands and accusations. Marcus felt the situation slipping away, felt the careful balance he'd been maintaining collapse under the weight of mob momentum. Dale was backing toward the door again, and Marcus moved with him, keeping himself between the manager and the advancing crowd. That's when the first bottle flew through the air. Marcus saw it in his peripheral vision, a dark shape arcing through the parking lot lights, and he moved on instinct, pulling Dale down as the bottle shattered against the building behind them, spraying them both with glass and liquid that reeked of energy drink. The crowd gasped, then went silent. Everyone suddenly aware that a line had been crossed, that this had transformed from protest to violence. Marcus straightened slowly, brushing glass from his jacket, his eyes scanning for whoever had thrown it. But everyone was looking at everyone else, the unified front fracturing as people realized they might have just become accessories to assault on a federal agent. The mother's face had gone pale, her phone now hanging limply at her side. "Last chance," Marcus said, his voice hard now, all gentleness gone. "Get in your cars and leave, or I call for backup, and every single one of you gets charged. Assault, harassment, blocking traffic, conspiracy. Your choice. Make it now." The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the young man with the tattoos backed away, hands raised, heading toward his car. The others followed, some reluctantly, some quickly, all of them still filming, all of them capturing their retreat for whatever story they'd tell later. The mother was the last to move, standing alone in the middle of the parking lot, her paper clutched in one hand, her phone in the other, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter," she whispered, and the words were so quiet Marcus almost didn't hear them. "She's really sick." Marcus felt something crack in his chest, the cold professional armor he'd maintained giving way to a father's empathy. "Then go be with her," he said gently. "Not here. Be with her. That's where you're needed." The woman nodded once, turned, and walked back to her Honda with the slow, defeated gait of someone who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Her car started, pulled around the blocked lane, and disappeared into the night. The others followed, their coordinated arrival becoming a scattered retreat until only Marcus and Dale remained standing in a parking lot covered in broken glass and red paint, the neon sign above still flickering its cheerful promise of food and service. Dale was shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline crash, from the sudden release of fear that had been holding him rigid. "Thank you," he managed. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the hospital form the mother had dropped, and what he saw there made his blood run cold for the second time that night. The paper had landed face up on the asphalt, the fluorescent lights above illuminating details that Marcus's trained eye caught immediately. The header wasn't from any hospital he recognized, and he'd memorized every medical facility in a 50-mile radius during his surveillance preparation. This was from an urgent care clinic 3 towns over, dated 2 weeks ago, not 3 days. And the name on the form, the patient's name, didn't match the age the mother had implied. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but legible enough for Marcus to read what mattered. The diagnosis section mentioned gastroenteritis, common food poisoning. But the notes section, where a doctor would typically detail the suspected source, was blank. No mention of pickles, no mention of allergens, no mention of Burger Haven at all. Marcus bent down and picked up the paper, careful not to contaminate it further, though it had already been handled by multiple people. Dale was still standing behind him, his breathing gradually slowing, trying to process what had just happened. The drive-through lane was empty now, the customers who'd been trapped having taken the opportunity to leave once the path cleared. Inside the restaurant, faces still pressed against the windows, employees watching their manager stand in a parking lot with a federal agent, probably wondering if they still had jobs. If the store would even open tomorrow. "Dale," Marcus said quietly, not turning around. "How many complaints has this location received in the past month? About food quality, allergies, anything like that?" He folded the paper carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket. Evidence now in an investigation he hadn't planned to conduct. Dale's voice was steadier now, though still shaky around the edges. "Maybe 3 or 4. Standard stuff, wrong order, cold fries. One lady said her burger was undercooked, but she'd already eaten half of it, so we couldn't verify. Nothing about allergies. We take those seriously. There's a whole protocol, separate gloves, dedicated prep area. We have to log every allergy order in the system." He paused, and Marcus could hear him moving closer. "Are you saying she made it up? Her daughter being sick?" Marcus turned to face him, studying the paint-stained shirt, the glass fragments still caught in Dale's hair, the way his hands trembled even as he tried to appear calm. "I'm saying the timeline doesn't match her story, and the medical documentation doesn't support her claims. But that doesn't mean her daughter isn't sick. People don't usually go to this extreme without believing they have a reason, even if that reason is built on incomplete information or misplaced blame." The realization of what had almost happened was settling over Dale's features like a slow-moving fog. "They could have killed me," he whispered. "Or I could have, when I reached for my phone in my pocket to call the police, if you hadn't been here, if they'd thought it was a weapon." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus had seen the statistics, knew how quickly these situations could spiral from confrontation to tragedy. How many videos existed online of exactly this scenario ending with someone bleeding out on pavement while cameras kept rolling. "But that didn't happen," Marcus said firmly. "You're safe. They're gone." Now I need you to do something for me. I need access to your order records, specifically any orders from the past 3 weeks matching that woman's description or vehicle, and I need to see your allergy protocol logs." Dale blinked, confusion replacing fear. "You're investigating us. I thought you were here to help." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. "I'm investigating the truth, which means looking at all sides. If your restaurant did nothing wrong, the records will show that. If there was a mistake, even an honest one, we need to know. Because that woman is going to wake up tomorrow, watch whatever videos her friends posted, and she's either going to be horrified at what she did, or she's going to double down. Either way, when the lawyers get involved, and they will, you want to have every piece of evidence documented and ready." They went inside through the employee entrance, past walls covered in mandatory safety posters and health inspection certificates, into an office barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Dale's hands shook as he logged into the computer system, pulling up order histories, his fingers fumbling over keys he normally navigated with practiced ease. Marcus stood behind him, watching data scroll across the screen, timestamps and order numbers and customer descriptions that painted a picture of hundreds of transactions, thousands of burgers and fries exchanged for cash and credit cards, an endless stream of human hunger being temporarily satisfied. "There," Dale said, pointing at an entry from 16 days ago. "Silver Honda, special instructions for no pickles due to allergy. Order was flagged in the system, prepared according to protocol. Customer picked up food at 8:42 p.m., no complaints at the window." He clicked through to another screen showing the employee who'd taken the order, a different worker who'd prepared it, a chain of responsibility that was documented with the kind of detail that suggested this franchise took its procedures seriously. Marcus pulled out his phone, photographing the screen, creating his own documentation trail. Who was working that night? Are they here now? Dale shook his head. "Different shift. But I can get you names, contact information. They're good kids. They wouldn't deliberately hurt anyone." The defensiveness in his voice was understandable, the instinct to protect his team, even as he cooperated with an investigation that might implicate them. But Marcus was looking at something else now, a pattern in the data that his investigator's mind had caught. The same customer, the same silver Honda, had ordered from this location 6 times in the past month, and every single time there were special instructions about allergies. Pickles one time, onions another, tomatoes, lettuce, varying complaints that didn't match the kind of consistent allergy profile someone would actually have. People with genuine food allergies tended to avoid everything they were allergic to. They didn't rotate through different allergens like a menu of convenient excuses. "Pull up the complaint history again," Marcus said. "Not just from this month, go back 6 months." Dale complied, and the pattern became clearer. Different customers, different vehicles, but similar complaint structures. Food made them sick, always a day or 2 after eating, always vague enough to be plausible but specific enough to sound legitimate. And several of them, when Marcus cross-referenced the timestamps, had ordered during overlapping shifts, suggesting they might have encountered the same employees. "You're being targeted," Marcus said quietly. Dale's face went pale beneath the harsh office lighting. "What do you mean, targeted? Like on purpose?" Marcus nodded slowly, his mind assembling pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. "I think someone is running a scam, building cases for lawsuits, gathering evidence, real or manufactured, to go after franchise locations. They order food, claim it made them sick, create social media campaigns to pressure settlements. It's not about justice. It's about money." The weight of this realization settled over the small office like a physical presence. If Marcus was right, then tonight's confrontation wasn't the eruption of genuine parental rage. It was theater, a performance designed to create viral content, to build pressure, to make this franchise location so radioactive that corporate headquarters would pay anything to make the problem disappear quietly. The mother's tears might have been real, her fear for her daughter might have been genuine, but they'd been weaponized, pointed at targets who had no defense except their own exhaustion and their minimum wage inability to fight back. Dale was staring at the computer screen like it contained evidence of some vast conspiracy. But why us? We're just a burger place. We don't have money. Corporate does, but individual franchises, we operate on thin margins. One lawsuit could shut us down. And that, Marcus thought, was exactly the point. Individual franchises were vulnerable, easier to pressure, more likely to settle quickly rather than fight expensive legal battles. Go after enough of them, build enough cases, and the settlements would add up to serious money. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time calling a number he'd hoped he wouldn't need tonight. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "This better be important, Chen. It's almost midnight." Marcus turned away from Dale, lowering his voice. "Patterson, I need you to run a check on some names for me. Cross-reference with any ongoing fraud investigations, particularly anything involving food service litigation, and I need surveillance footage from a Burger Haven franchise, tonight's incident plus the past month if you can get it." There was a pause, the sound of Patterson waking up fully, the FBI agent's training kicking in. "This related to your money laundering case?" "No," Marcus admitted. "This is something else. But it's connected to people in the community, and if I'm right about what I'm seeing, it's bigger than one restaurant." He gave Patterson the relevant details, the case number he was improvising as he went, justifying the use of federal resources for something that should have been local police jurisdiction. But Patterson didn't question it, just promised to have preliminary information by morning and hung up. When Marcus turned back, Dale was no longer looking at the computer. He was looking at his phone, his face illuminated by the glow of social media feeds that were already filling with videos from tonight's confrontation. "We're everywhere," he whispered. "TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. They're calling us poisoners, saying we target children, that we need to be shut down. There's already a petition with 3,000 signatures." He looked up at Marcus with eyes that had seen the future and found it terrifying. "By tomorrow morning, this will be national news. Corporate will see it. Customers will see it. It won't matter that none of it is true. The damage is already done." Marcus wanted to tell him he was wrong, that truth would prevail, that justice would be served. But he'd been in law enforcement too long to believe in those comfortable lies. He'd seen innocent people destroyed by viral videos, seen careers ended by accusations that were later disproven, but never corrected with the same enthusiasm as they'd been made. The internet had no memory for retractions, only for outrage. "Then we move fast," Marcus said. "We get ahead of this. We document everything, build an airtight case, and we find out who's really behind this operation. Because that mother, whoever she is, she's not the mastermind. She's a weapon someone else is pointing." He pulled out the hospital form again, studying it under the office lights, seeing details he'd missed before. The clinic's logo looked slightly wrong, the colors not quite matching what a quick image search on his phone revealed the actual clinic used. The doctor's signature was illegible, which wasn't unusual, but the medical license number that should have been printed below it was smudged, conveniently unreadable. "This is fake," Marcus said, holding up the paper. "Or at least partially fabricated. The visit might have been real, but someone doctored this document to strengthen the case, to make it look more serious than it was." Dale made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "So she lied about everything? Her daughter being poisoned, the allergies, all of it?" Marcus shook his head. "Not everything. I think her daughter probably did get sick. Kids get food poisoning all the time from any number of sources. But someone convinced her it was your restaurant's fault, gave her this document to make her believe it, pointed her at you and told her this was how to get justice. She's a victim too, just a different kind." The office suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in with the weight of conspiracy and manipulation and the terrible efficiency of modern technology to destroy lives at the speed of a share button. Marcus needed air, needed space to think, needed to step back and see the full picture before he drowned in details. "I'm going to need copies of everything," he told Dale. "Every order, every complaint, every piece of documentation you have. Email them to me tonight. And tomorrow, when corporate calls, and they will call, you tell them you're cooperating with a federal investigation. That should buy you some time before they make any decisions about the franchise." They stepped back outside into the parking lot, where the broken glass still glittered under the neon lights like fallen stars. The paint on the pavement, the scattered evidence of tonight's confrontation, would need to be photographed, documented, preserved. Marcus's cover operation was completely blown now. Months of work evaporated in the space of an hour. His handler would be furious. The money laundering investigation would have to be reassigned or abandoned. But as he stood there, looking at the ordinary fast food restaurant that had become an unwitting battlefield in a war being fought through screens and viral videos, Marcus realized he didn't care. Because somewhere in this city, possibly in a comfortable home with expensive furniture and multiple computers, someone was orchestrating these attacks. Someone was finding desperate people with sick children or mounting bills or legitimate grievances that had nothing to do with burgers and everything to do with a system that had failed them and turning them into weapons. Someone was making money off rage and fear and the beautiful, terrible power of a connected world to destroy anything it decided to hate. Marcus pulled out his phone and started making calls. Real ones this time, burning through contacts and favors and goodwill he'd been saving for emergencies. Because if he was right, if this pattern extended beyond this one franchise, then there were more Dales out there, more managers standing in parking lots wondering how their lives had been destroyed by something they didn't do. There were more mothers being manipulated into attacking the wrong targets. There were more viral videos being filmed right now, building cases, creating content, feeding an algorithm that rewarded outrage with attention and attention with profit. "You're talking about systematic fraud," Sarah finally said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many variations of human cruelty. "That's organized crime territory, Chen. That's RICO if you can prove coordination." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. The recognition that he'd been right making him feel worse rather than better. "I know, which is why I need eyes on this fast. Can you pull recent complaints filed against food service establishments in the county? Cross-reference with social media campaigns, viral videos, settlements that happen suspiciously quick. I'm looking for patterns." He could hear Sarah typing, the background clatter of a keyboard that meant she'd already moved to her computer, already committed to helping, despite the late hour and the jurisdictional complications this represented. "Give me until morning. But Chen, if this is as big as you think, if someone's running an operation that's sophisticated, they're going to notice you looking. And if they've got the resources to orchestrate viral campaigns, they've got the resources to make you the next target." The warning hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Marcus had considered this, of course. The moment he'd revealed himself as a federal agent, he'd become visible, traceable, vulnerable. Whoever was behind this would see the videos just like everyone else. They'd know their operation had federal attention now. "Let them come," Marcus said, surprised by the coldness in his own voice. "I'm tired of watching people get destroyed while the architects hide behind screens." He ended the call before Sarah could respond, before she could hear the anger that was building in him like pressure behind a dam. This wasn't about his blown cover anymore, wasn't about the money laundering case he'd been working for months. This was personal in a way that transcended professional duty, personal in the way that seeing a scared manager covered in paint and surrounded by cameras had made it personal. Personal in the way that watching a mother's grief be weaponized had made it personal. Dale had gone back inside to deal with his traumatized staff, leaving Marcus alone in the parking lot with his thoughts and his phone, and the growing certainty that he was standing at the edge of something much darker than he'd initially understood. He pulled up the videos that were spreading across social media, forcing himself to watch them, to see how the narrative was being constructed in real time. The clips were edited expertly, cutting away context, focusing on Dale's fear and the mother's tears, the paint on his shirt looking like blood in the compressed video quality, the confrontation framed as brave citizens standing up to corporate negligence. The comments section was a cesspool of rage and righteous indignation, thousands of people calling for boycotts, demanding arrests, sharing stories of their own food poisoning experiences, whether relevant or not. But scattered among the genuine outrage, Marcus spotted something that made his investigators' instincts flare. Several accounts, maybe a dozen, were posting identical or near-identical comments across multiple videos, always with links to legal services specializing in food safety litigation, always with hashtags that seemed designed to maximize algorithmic visibility. The accounts looked real at first glance, profile pictures and bio information and posting histories. But when Marcus dug deeper, clicking through to their other content, patterns emerged. They all posted about similar issues: consumer safety, corporate malfeasance, always with the same undertone of call to action urgency, always with links to the same handful of law firms. Marcus screenshotted everything, building a digital paper trail that was already forming a picture in his mind. This wasn't just opportunistic scamming. This was infrastructure, a carefully built machine designed to identify targets, manufacture outrage, and funnel the resulting cases toward specific legal entities that would take their percentage before settling. It was brilliant in its own terrible way, leveraging the internet's capacity for viral spread and people's genuine frustration with corporate power, turning legitimate grievances into a profit stream that hurt everyone except the people running it. His phone buzzed with an incoming email from Dale, attachments containing the restaurant's order histories and complaint logs, gigabytes of data that Marcus would need to sift through to find the supporting evidence for his theory. But before he could start that process, another call came through, this one from Patterson, which was unusual because Patterson had said he'd have information by morning, not in the middle of the night. Marcus answered immediately, his free hand unconsciously moving toward his weapon in a gesture that had become instinct whenever unexpected things happened at unexpected times. "Chen, we have a problem," Patterson said without preamble. "I started running those names through our databases like you asked, and I got a hit. Not on the woman from tonight, but on one of the other people in that crowd. The kid with the tattoos, the one who painted your manager. His name is Travis Keller, and he's flagged in 3 separate FBI investigations. Nothing we could charge him with, just a person of interest, but always around the edges of social media harassment campaigns. He's connected to at least 2 swatting incidents and 1 case where someone got doxxed so badly they had to relocate. Chen, this guy isn't some random protester. He's a professional agitator." The parking lot suddenly felt colder, the neon lights dimmer, as if the world had shifted slightly off its axis. Marcus replayed the confrontation in his mind, seeing it now with this new information coloring his perception. The way Travis had held back initially, letting the mother take the lead, only stepping forward to escalate at precisely calculated moments. The spray paint that could have been anything, could have been acid or worse, but was carefully chosen to be just threatening enough without crossing into territory that would bring immediate law enforcement response. The timing of his arrival with the other vehicles, the coordination that suggested planning and communication. This hadn't been spontaneous rage. This had been a performance, and Travis had been playing a role he'd practiced before. "Get me everything you have on him," Marcus said. "Associates' known addresses, financial records if you can get them legally. And Patterson, expand the search. I want to know if there are other Travis Kellers out there, other professional agitators showing up at multiple incidents like this. Because if there are, if this is an organized network rather than isolated incidents, then we're looking at something that goes way beyond local fraud." He could hear Patterson breathing on the other end, the sound of someone realizing they'd just volunteered for an investigation that was going to consume their life for the foreseeable future. This is going to piss off a lot of people, Chen. You're talking about investigating social justice activists, people who see themselves as fighting corporate power. The optics are terrible. The politics are worse. If this goes public before we have ironclad proof, we'll be accused of suppressing legitimate protest. Patterson was right, and Marcus knew it. This was a minefield where every step could trigger explosions of bad press and accusations of serving corporate interests. But the alternative was letting this continue, letting more Dales get destroyed, letting more mothers get manipulated into attacking people who hadn't hurt anyone. Then we better get ironclad proof, Marcus said, and we better move fast, because whoever's running this operation is going to pivot the moment they realize federal attention is on them. They'll clean house, destroy evidence, disappear into the digital fog like they were never there. He ended the call and stood in the parking lot, trying to think like the person he was hunting, trying to understand the psychology of someone who would build a machine designed to destroy ordinary people's lives for profit while hiding behind the language of justice and accountability. The psychology wasn't hard to imagine, actually. Marcus had seen variations of it throughout his career, people who found ways to profit from conflict, who positioned themselves as champions of the wronged while carefully ensuring the wrong people got targeted. People who understood that outrage was a renewable resource in the age of social media, and that viral content was just another commodity to be harvested and sold. What made this particular variation insidious was how it weaponized genuine problems, taking real issues like food safety and corporate negligence and twisting them into tools that ultimately made those problems harder to address because they poisoned the well of public trust. Inside the restaurant, through the windows, Marcus could see Dale talking to his employees, probably trying to explain what had happened, why their workplace had become a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons, whether they still had jobs tomorrow. Some of them were crying, the young ones who'd taken this job thinking it would be a simple way to earn money between classes or on weekends, not understanding that in the modern world there was no such thing as a simple job anymore, that any interaction could be recorded and weaponized, that going viral was a threat rather than a dream. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a number he didn't recognize. The message was short, just 6 words, but they hit him like a physical blow. You should have minded your business. There was no context, no signature, nothing to indicate who'd sent it or how they'd gotten his personal number, but Marcus didn't need context. This was a message from whoever was running the operation, a message that said they'd seen the videos, identified him, and were now letting him know they knew exactly who he was. He should have felt threatened, should have felt the cold calculation of risk assessment that comes with being targeted by an unknown adversary. But instead, Marcus felt something else entirely. He felt the predatory focus that came from having his target finally reveal themselves, even just slightly, even just enough to confirm they existed and were watching. Because sending that text was a mistake. A moment of ego or fear or anger that meant whoever sent it cared about what Marcus was doing, was worried enough to try intimidation as a first response. And people who tried intimidation were people who had something to lose. Marcus saved the number, forwarded the text to Patterson with instructions to trace it, and then did something that might have been stupid, or might have been exactly the right move. He replied. 3 words, carefully chosen for maximum impact. Come find me then. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, before the rational part of his brain could override the instinct that told him the only way to flush out his opponent was to make himself such an attractive target they couldn't resist taking a shot. The response came within seconds, fast enough that whoever was on the other end had been waiting, watching their phone, anticipating that Marcus would respond. Oh, we will. And when we're done, you'll wish you'd stayed in your car. This response was longer, more emotional, which told Marcus something about his opponent's state of mind. They were confident, but not as confident as they wanted to appear. They were used to winning, used to their targets folding under pressure, and Marcus's refusal to be intimidated was throwing them off their script. He didn't reply again, letting silence be his response, letting whoever was on the other end wonder what he was thinking, what he was planning. Instead, he turned his attention back to the data Dale had sent, opening files on his phone and beginning the tedious process of pattern analysis that was the unglamorous reality of most investigative work. Numbers and timestamps and customer descriptions began to form a picture, each data point a pixel in an image that was slowly coming into focus. The same names appeared across multiple complaints, but never frequently enough to be obvious. Never in patterns that would trigger automated fraud detection. Orders placed during specific shifts, always with minor modifications that created opportunities for error. Complaints filed days later when verification would be difficult. Medical documentation that was always just slightly wrong in ways that wouldn't be immediately apparent. Marcus was so focused on the data that he almost missed the sound of an engine approaching, almost failed to register the vehicle that pulled into the parking lot and parked 3 spaces away from his sedan. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, so common it was invisible. Nobody got out. The engine idled, rumbling through the night air, and Marcus felt every nerve in his body come alive with the awareness that something was about to happen. That the confrontation he'd invited was arriving faster than he'd anticipated. His hand moved to his weapon, not drawing it but ready to, his body shifting into a stance that would let him move in any direction instantly. The SUV's driver's side window rolled down slowly, electric motor whirring, revealing not Travis Keller or the mother from earlier or anyone Marcus recognized from the videos, but a woman in her 50s with expensive-looking glasses and an expression of calculated neutrality that immediately identified her as someone used to navigating complex negotiations. "Agent Chen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance between vehicles. "My name is Rebecca Vance. I'm an attorney. I think we should talk." Marcus didn't move from his position, didn't show any reaction to the woman's arrival or her knowledge of his name, but his mind was already working through the implications. Rebecca Vance. The name meant nothing to him immediately, but attorneys didn't show up in parking lots at midnight unless they were either very desperate or very confident, and nothing about this woman's posture suggested desperation. She sat in her SUV like someone who owned the space around her, who expected the world to rearrange itself to accommodate her presence. Marcus had met dozens like her, attorneys who specialized in the gray areas between legal and criminal, who understood that the law was less about justice and more about whoever could afford the better argument. "Counselor," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same neutral tone she'd used. "It's late for house calls. Or parking lot calls, as the case may be." He kept his hand near his weapon, not threatening but visible, a reminder that despite the civilized words being exchanged, this was still a confrontation, still a moment balanced on the edge of violence or revelation. Rebecca smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes, a professional gesture that meant nothing and communicated everything about how she viewed this interaction. "I'll be brief then," she said. "I represent several clients who were present at tonight's unfortunate incident. Clients who are now concerned that their legitimate exercise of free speech rights may have been misconstrued as criminal behavior due to your intervention." She paused, letting the words settle, and Marcus recognized the strategy immediately. This was positioning, getting her narrative on record, framing the confrontation as protected protest rather than harassment and intimidation. "My clients are willing to pursue this matter quietly through appropriate legal channels, provided certain parties show equal restraint in characterizing tonight's events." Marcus laughed, short and sharp, the sound cutting through the night air like breaking glass. "Restraint. That's an interesting word for what you're asking. Let me translate for anyone who might be listening." He gestured toward the restaurant where he knew employees were probably still watching. probably still recording. Your clients, and by extension you, want me to forget what I saw tonight. Want me to ignore the assault on a restaurant manager, the harassment, the manufactured evidence, the coordinated intimidation campaign. And in exchange, you won't file some nuisance complaint about me doing my job. Rebecca's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes, a calculation being adjusted in real time. Agent Chen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. My clients have legitimate grievances about food safety negligence. They have medical documentation supporting their claims. Tonight's protest was an expression of frustration with a system that consistently fails to protect consumers from corporate malfeasance. If that protest became somewhat heated, well, passions run high when children's health is at stake. Children's health, Marcus repeated, pulling out the hospital form from his pocket and holding it up where she could see it, even in the dim light. You mean this fabricated document? This poorly forged medical record that wouldn't stand up to 30 seconds of verification? That's what we're calling evidence now. He took 3 steps toward her SUV, close enough to see her expression clearly, close enough to watch her reaction. Here's what I think is really happening, counselor. I think you represent a network of people who figured out how to weaponize social media against small businesses. Find vulnerable targets, manufacture controversies, create viral moments, and then swoop in with settlement offers that are cheaper than fighting. It's extortion with extra steps and a prettier face. For the first time, Rebecca's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for Marcus to see the anger underneath. That's a serious accusation, Agent, one you couldn't possibly prove. But the way she said it, the defensive edge to her words, told Marcus he'd hit close to the truth, close enough to make her worry. And even if such a thing were happening, which I'm absolutely not confirming, you'd have a very difficult time convincing anyone that protecting corporate interests from consumer activism is appropriate use of federal resources. Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the point even as he rejected it. You're right that the optics are complicated, but you're wrong about what I can prove. See, the beautiful thing about running an operation like this in the digital age is that everything leaves traces. Every coordinated arrival, every edited video, every sock puppet account posting identical comments, every suspiciously quick settlement, it's all data, and data tells stories to people who know how to read it. He pulled out his phone, making a show of checking something on the screen. And the story I'm reading says you've been running this scam across at least 6 states, targeting franchise locations specifically because they're vulnerable, using people like that mother tonight as weapons while you profit from the destruction. Rebecca's hand moved to her own phone, a mirror of Marcus's gesture, and for a moment they stood there in the parking lot like gunslingers at high noon, except their weapons were phones and lawyers, and the accumulated weight of evidence neither had fully shown yet. You don't know what you're interfering with, she said, and for the first time her voice carried something other than professional neutrality. It carried warning, genuine warning, the kind that suggested Marcus had stumbled into something larger than he'd imagined. This isn't about money, or it's not just about money. You think I'm the bad guy here? You think I'm the one hurting people? She laughed, and it was a bitter sound. Nothing like her earlier professional smile. These corporations, these franchises, they do hurt people, Agent Chen. They cut corners on food safety, they underpay workers, they pollute communities. And when someone gets sick or injured or destroyed, they have armies of lawyers and unlimited resources to grind victims into dust. What I do, what we do, is level the playing field. We give ordinary people the tools to fight back, to make these corporations pay attention, to force accountability when the system designed to protect consumers has been bought and paid for by the same corporations it's supposed to regulate. Marcus felt the argument like a physical pressure, felt the seductive logic of it trying to reshape his understanding of what he'd witnessed tonight. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. That was the terrible thing. Corporations did all those things she mentioned. The system was rigged in their favor. Ordinary people were ground up and spit out by indifferent machines of profit every single day. But that truth didn't justify what he'd seen, didn't excuse turning Dale into collateral damage, didn't make it acceptable to manufacture evidence and manipulate grieving mothers into attacking minimum wage workers who had no power to change anything. "You're right," Marcus said, and watched surprise flicker across Rebecca's face. "The system is broken. Corporate power is out of control. People get hurt and have no recourse. But you know what? You're making it worse. Every time you manufacture a case, every time you fake evidence, every time you turn legitimate protests into performances for viral videos, you make it harder for real victims to be believed. You poison the well that everyone has to drink from, and that manager in there," he pointed toward the restaurant, "he's not corporate power. He's a guy working 2 jobs to feed his kids. You didn't level any playing field tonight. You just found someone weaker than you and crushed them while calling it justice." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with all the arguments neither of them was making, all the complexities of a world where right and wrong had been shattered into 1,000 pieces and reassembled into shapes nobody recognized anymore. Rebecca's fingers were still on her phone, and Marcus realized she was recording this. Had probably been recording since she rolled down her window, gathering evidence for whatever counter-narrative she was already constructing. "This conversation is over," Rebecca said finally. "But Agent Chen, consider this your only warning. The people I work with, they're not just some small-time operation. They have resources you can't imagine, connections that go deeper than you think. If you pursue this, if you try to interfere with what we're building, you won't just lose your case. You'll lose everything. Your career, your reputation, your life as you know it. We've destroyed better men than you for less." She started to roll up her window, dismissing him, but Marcus stepped closer, close enough to rest his hand on the doorframe, stopping the window's ascent. "Rebecca," he said, using her first name deliberately, making it personal. "I want you to understand something. I'm not going to threaten you back, because threats are what scared people use, and I'm not scared. But I am going to stop you. I'm going to take apart your operation piece by piece, connection by connection, until everyone involved is either in prison or so radioactive they'll never work again. Not because I love corporations or because I'm naive about how power works, but because you hurt people and called it activism, because you turned justice into a business model. Because someone has to." He stepped back, letting her close the window, watching as the SUV pulled away smoothly, its taillights disappearing into the night like a departing threat. Marcus stood alone in the parking lot again, feeling the adrenaline drain from his system, leaving behind exhaustion and a clarity that came from having finally seen the full shape of what he was fighting. This wasn't just about fraud or extortion or social media scams. This was about something deeper, something that spoke to how thoroughly technology had twisted human interaction into performance, how completely outrage had become currency, how easily justice could be counterfeited and sold to the highest bidder. His phone rang, Patterson's name on the screen, and Marcus answered without his usual greeting. "Tell me you got something," he said, his voice rough with tiredness and determination. Patterson's response was energized, excited in the way investigators get when pieces start falling into place. "Chen, you're not going to believe this. I ran that attorney's name through our databases. Rebecca Vance has her fingers in 14 different LLCs, all registered in Delaware, all connected to social media consulting and legal services. But here's where it gets interesting. One of those LLCs received $2 million in funding last year from a venture capital firm that specializes in litigation finance. They're literally investors in lawsuits, funding cases in exchange for percentages of settlements." Marcus felt the final piece click into place, the full picture suddenly visible in his mind, like a photograph developing in solution. This wasn't just Rebecca and her network of agitators. This was venture capital. This was Silicon Valley money seeing social media outrage as an untapped market. This was the same people who'd commodified every other aspect of human existence, deciding that justice and activism could be monetized too. They'd built an algorithm for generating viral controversies, identified the most vulnerable targets, created infrastructure to weaponize legitimate grievances, and packaged it all as consumer protection while reaping profits from the chaos. "Get me everything on that VC firm," Marcus said. "Board members, portfolio companies, any connections to social media platforms or content creators. And Patterson, we need to move fast. They know we're looking now. They're going to start covering tracks." He could hear Patterson typing, already executing the request, but there was hesitation in the silence between keystrokes. "Chen, you know this is going to get ugly, right? We're talking about going after people with resources to fight back, people who'll use every tool they have to make us the story instead of them. Media connections, political influence, the whole arsenal. Let them," Marcus said. "I'm done watching people get destroyed while everyone looks away because it's complicated or because the optics are bad. Sometimes the right thing is messy and uncomfortable and politically inconvenient. Sometimes you have to choose between being liked and being right." He ended the call and turned back toward the restaurant where Dale was standing in the doorway now, paint-stained and exhausted but still standing, still here, still fighting to understand how his ordinary life had been turned into a battlefield. Marcus walked toward him, crossing the parking lot that had become the arena for everything wrong with how truth and justice had been corrupted by technology and profit motive. When he reached Dale, he didn't offer empty reassurances or false promises that everything would be fine. Instead, he offered something more valuable. He offered the truth. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," Marcus said. "They're going to escalate, going to try to bury you in videos and accusations and legal threats. But I'm going to stop them, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what really happened here tonight." Dale nodded slowly, and in his eyes, Marcus saw something he recognized from the mirror on his worst days. It was the look of someone who'd seen how easily the world could turn against you, how quickly everything you'd built could be destroyed by forces you never knew existed. But underneath that look was something else, something harder and more resilient. It was the refusal to break, the determination to endure, the simple human insistence on continuing to exist despite everything. But what Marcus kept thinking about, what occupied his mind even as the prosecutor methodically dismantled Rebecca's defense, was the mother. Her name was Jennifer Park, and she'd been horrified when Marcus had shown her the real timeline, the fabricated elements of the document she'd trusted, the way she'd been manipulated into attacking people who'd never hurt her daughter. The girl, 8-year-old Emma, had indeed gotten sick, but from a school cafeteria lunch, not from Burger Haven, a fact confirmed by health department records that Rebecca's people had deliberately concealed from Jennifer while feeding her alternative evidence that supported their narrative. Jennifer had cried in Marcus's office, not the performed tears from the parking lot video, but genuine grief for what she'd been made to do, for how her fear for her daughter had been weaponized and pointed at innocent people. She testified yesterday, voice shaking, describing how she'd been approached through a Facebook support group for parents of children with food allergies, how someone had offered to help her get justice and compensation for her daughter's suffering, how reasonable it had all seemed when presented as holding corporations accountable for negligence. The jury had listened with expressions that shifted between sympathy and horror, understanding how someone desperate and scared could be turned into a weapon without realizing it, how the language of justice could disguise the machinery of exploitation. Marcus had watched Rebecca's face during that testimony, looking for remorse or recognition or anything human, but found only the cold calculation of someone already planning their next move, their next appeal, their next angle. Dale was there too, sitting in the gallery 3 rows behind Marcus, his presence a quiet statement about survival and resilience. The Burger Haven franchise hadn't closed, though corporate had seriously considered it during the worst of the viral storm. Instead, something unexpected had happened. The full story had eventually emerged through persistent journalism and leaked documents, the narrative flipping as people realized they'd been manipulated, that their outrage had been manufactured and directed by profiteers. The backlash against the backlash had brought customers flooding back, people who wanted to support a business that had been wronged, workers who'd been scapegoated for crimes that never happened. Dale had been promoted to regional manager, his ordeal paradoxically advancing his career, though Marcus knew the man still had nightmares about standing in that parking lot surrounded by cameras, paint on his shirt, the world watching him be destroyed for entertainment. The verdict came back guilty on 17 counts: fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, the legal language cold and precise in describing what had been messy and human in execution. Rebecca's face remained impassive as the forewoman read each count, as the judge scheduled sentencing, as bailiffs led her away in handcuffs that seemed almost ceremonial given how politely everyone was behaving. Marcus felt no satisfaction in watching her fall, no triumph in having been right, only exhaustion and the awareness that this was one network dismantled while hundreds of others continued operating, that he'd cut off one head of a hydra that would simply grow two more unless something fundamental changed about how people related to truth and outrage and the seductive simplicity of viral narratives. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered like hungry birds, shouting questions that Marcus ignored as he walked toward his car. He'd given his official statement weeks ago, had cooperated with the journalists who'd broken the wider story, and had no interest in becoming the face of this case, in being elevated to hero status for doing what should have been ordinary, for choosing to see a situation clearly rather than through the distorting lens of algorithmic outrage. His phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, a book deal offer from a publisher who thought his story would make compelling true crime content. But Marcus deleted them all, understanding that accepting any of them would make him part of the same machine he'd fought against, would turn this fight into content, into entertainment, into just another story people consumed and forgot. Dale was waiting by Marcus's car, hands in pockets, looking uncertain about whether this conversation was appropriate or welcome. They'd spoken a few times during the investigation, formal interviews and evidence review sessions, but never really talked, never addressed what had happened in that parking lot beyond its legal implications. Now, with the case concluded and justice theoretically served, the space between them felt full of things that needed saying, but lacked adequate words. "I wanted to thank you properly," Dale said. "Not just for that night, but for everything after, for believing it mattered, for not letting them bury it." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd thought deeply about gratitude and its inadequacy in the face of genuine salvation. Marcus shook his head, uncomfortable with the thanks, with the implication that he'd done something extraordinary rather than simply refusing to look away. "You don't owe me anything, I just did my job." "No," Dale said firmly. "Your job was investigating money laundering. What you did was see another human being in trouble and choose to help even when it cost you something. That's not a job. That's character." He pulled something from his pocket, a photograph worn at the edges from handling, and held it out to Marcus. It showed two kids, maybe 10 and 12, grinning at the camera with the unself-conscious joy of children who still believed the world was fundamentally safe. "My kids. They still have a father who can provide for them because you didn't stay in your car, because you stepped into something that wasn't your problem and made it your responsibility." Marcus took the photograph, studying the faces, thinking about all the children who existed in the margins of stories like this. Invisible casualties of systems designed to generate profit from conflict. Emma Park with her food poisoning that became a weapon. Dale's kids who almost lost their father's livelihood. The teenage worker at the drive-thru window who'd quit the next day, too traumatized to face cameras and customers again. his trust in human decency shattered by a viral moment he'd never asked to be part of. How many others were out there right now, being hurt by mechanisms they couldn't see, being turned into content or collateral damage or convenient villains in narratives constructed by people who'd never met them and never would? The system that allowed this to happen is still out there, Marcus said, handing back the photograph. The incentives that made it profitable are still in place. The platforms that amplified the lies are still amplifying new ones. We stopped one operation, but the infrastructure that enabled it remains. He wasn't trying to diminish what they'd accomplished, but honesty felt important, felt necessary in a world that had become too comfortable with comforting lies and performative solutions. Dale nodded slowly, understanding the larger context even as he celebrated the personal victory. So what do we do? How do people protect themselves from something that can turn them into villains overnight, that can destroy their lives before they even understand what's happening? The question hung between them, and Marcus realized it was the same question he'd been asking himself for 3 months, the question that kept him awake at night, even after the investigation concluded, even after justice had been technically served. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, and the honesty felt like relief, like permission to stop pretending he had answers to problems that were too large and too complex for individual solutions. Maybe we start by remembering that the people on our screens are real, that the drama we consume for entertainment is someone's actual life being destroyed, that the satisfying narrative of good guys and bad guys is almost always more complicated than it appears, and the rush to judgment we feel when we see something outrageous is often exactly what someone wants us to feel so they can profit from our anger. He paused, watching people stream out of the courthouse, some celebrating, some grieving, all of them participants in a system none of them had designed, but all of them perpetuated through their choices about what to share, what to believe, what to care about. Maybe the answer is less about new laws or better enforcement and more about remembering how to be human to each other, even through screens, Marcus continued. About choosing to pause before sharing that viral video, to question before joining that mob, to recognize that our outrage is being harvested as efficiently as any other natural resource and used to build fortunes for people who don't care about justice at all. It sounded idealistic even to his own ears, the kind of sentiment that would be mocked as naive by people who understood how the internet really worked, how attention economics really functioned, how the algorithms that governed modern life were designed to reward exactly the behaviors that made situations like Jennifer's mob in a parking lot not just possible, but inevitable. Dale smiled sadly, the expression of someone who'd learned painful lessons about human nature and the speed at which community could transform into crowd, support into harassment, justice into revenge. "My kids asked me if people are good or bad," he said. "After everything happened, after they saw the videos and heard what people were saying about me online, they wanted to know if the world was full of bad people or good people who do bad things. And I didn't know how to answer them because I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." Marcus thought about Jennifer Park testifying about how she'd been manipulated, tears streaming down her face as she described the moment she'd realized she'd attacked innocent people, that her righteous anger had been artificially manufactured and carefully directed. He thought about Rebecca Vance's face showing no remorse, no recognition that her actions had caused real harm to real people, her moral universe apparently constructed in a way that made her the hero of her own story, regardless of the suffering she'd caused. He thought about Travis Keller cutting deals and testifying against his former employers, motivated not by conscience but by self-preservation, playing the same game he'd always played with different rules. And he thought about himself, standing in that parking lot making split-second decisions that would determine whether people lived or died, whether justice was served or subverted, whether truth mattered or only the performance of truth mattered. "Maybe your kids are asking the wrong question," Marcus said finally. Maybe it's not about good people or bad people, but about systems that make it easier to do harm than to do good, that reward cruelty and punish compassion, that turn every human interaction into a transaction and every tragedy into content. Rebecca didn't start out evil. She probably started out wanting to help people, to fight corporate power, to make the world more just. Somewhere along the way, the tools became the purpose, the means became the end, and she stopped seeing the people she was hurting because they'd become abstractions, plot points in a larger narrative about fighting for the little guy. Dale was quiet for a long moment, processing this, turning it over in his mind the way someone examines a rock looking for precious metal. "So nothing changes," he said. "We stop one operation, and others continue. We teach our kids to be skeptical, and they become cynical. We try to make the world better and just end up participating in different versions of the same problems." Or, Marcus said, "We start small. We choose to see each other as human even when it's easier not to. We question narratives even when they confirm what we want to believe. We remember that the person being destroyed in that viral video is someone's father or mother or child, and that our participation in their destruction makes us complicit, even if we tell ourselves we're on the right side." He looked at Dale, this ordinary man who'd survived an extraordinary assault simply by refusing to become what people wanted to make him. By maintaining his humanity, even when the world tried to reduce him to a villain in someone else's story. "What happened in that parking lot should never have happened," Marcus continued. "But it did happen, and it will happen again unless enough people decide to stop participating in the machinery that makes it profitable. That's not a legal solution or a technical solution. That's a human solution. And it's harder than passing laws or building better platforms because it requires each person to choose differently, to value truth over outrage, to protect strangers instead of consuming their suffering as entertainment." They stood in the courthouse parking lot as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus of the neon lights from that first night, when a simple question about why someone would risk everything over a cheeseburger had led him down a path that revealed how thoroughly the machinery of modern life had been redesigned to profit from human conflict. The answer, he now understood, wasn't about cheeseburgers at all. It was about a world where every interaction was potentially a performance, where every grievance could be weaponized, where truth was whatever went viral first, and justice was whatever generated the most engagement. But standing there with Dale, watching the man head back to his car and his life, and his children who still believed their father was a hero, Marcus felt something that might have been hope. Not the cheap hope of easy solutions or simple answers, but the harder hope of people choosing to be better, even when systems encouraged them to be worse, of truth surviving, even when lies traveled faster, of small acts of decency accumulating into something that might eventually outweigh the calculated cruelty of those who'd industrialized outrage. The question Marcus had started with, why someone would risk everything over a cheeseburger, had been answered in ways more complex and disturbing than he'd imagined. But it had also revealed something else, something that the architects of viral outrage and manufactured justice hadn't accounted for in their algorithms and business models. It had revealed that beneath all the systems and platforms and incentive structures, there were still humans capable of choosing differently, of seeing clearly, of refusing to participate in cycles of destruction, even when participation was easier and more profitable than resistance. Rebecca Vance had built a machine to harvest human outrage for profit, but she'd forgotten that humans were more than fuel for her machine, that they could look at what they'd been made to do and choose to stop doing it. That truth might be slow and unglamorous, but it survived long after viral moments faded. As Marcus drove away from the courthouse, heading back to a life that would never quite be the same after that night in a Burger Haven parking lot, he thought about all the moments like that one happening right now across the world, All the people standing at crossroads where they had to choose between easy cruelty and difficult compassion, between viral outrage and stubborn truth. Some would choose badly. Systems designed to reward bad choices would see to that. But others would choose differently, would pause before sharing that video, would question before joining that mob, would remember that the person on their screen was real and deserving of the same consideration they'd want for themselves. It wasn't much, it wasn't enough. But it was something. And in a world that had learned to profit from nothing, something mattered more than it ever had before.